So I found a park bench near my house, and it's there's a nonprofit here that has public Wi-Fi. Um, it says here that this was someone's Eagle Scout project from Troop 792. So it's going to good use. Uh, so my name's Connor. If you're seeing this, chances are you know who I am because I'm going to be posting this on my Facebook. And I've been thinking a lot about how the state of Missouri is going to partially reopen tomorrow. St. Louis City and County are still under shelter in place. Kansas City is still under shelter in place, and I believe Springfield, Missouri will still be under shelter in place. I think Columbia, our major college town, is still, I think they're going along with the rest of the state. For the most part, I think most of the, I basically just named off to you the four largest population centers in the state. The governor has decided that it's time to partially reopen. We'll see how that goes. I'm not very optimistic, but I guess for whatever it's worth, they're letting folks here in counties where things aren't really getting any better have their own shelter-in-place orders. St. Louis and Kansas City and Columbia sometimes like to create their own laws that the state likes to preempt, but the governor seems to be wanting to make things on a county-by-county basis, but the statewide order is going to be lifted tomorrow morning. The group that I think was maybe most interested in spearheading this effort of reopening the state, it's a group called Reopen Missouri, and I've been following their posts on social media. Now, they're not quite like the folks going into Lansing, Michigan with rifles. I understand that Michigan is an open carry state. Missouri is concealed carry. So to the extent that our protesters are armed, they're not visible. But I read a comment in the post on the Facebook page, and again, there's 17,000 members in this group. It's one person's opinion. But someone wrote on there, I learned about forms of totalitarianism as a teenager. I considered communism a thing that would never hit the U.S., fascism, an ideology that would never again happen. I learned about authoritarian governments through books, and it always felt far away, like a story that would never come true. Now, under the lockdown in St. Louis, I not only know what totalitarian regimes are, but I feel it, the oppression. I understand it, the devastation. I kind of facetiously wrote to that person that Starbucks in St. Louis City and County still do drive-through, and that I'd be happy to get her something. For some reason, Starbucks has been on my mind. Coffee shops are a place that I really like. I was really happy to see that the Stone Spiral in Maplewood was doing takeout service. They set up a table at the front. But I've been thinking about how the two counties adjacent to St. Louis, Jefferson and St. Charles counties, both counties about a little over 100,000 people. They're St. Louis. As far as the Census Bureau is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, they're St. Louis adjacent, just as East St. Louis, Belleville, other towns across the river, are pretty much St. Louis adjacent. There aren't very many coffee shops in St. Charles, and there are a few independent ones, and there's a few Starbucks. And in Jefferson County, which is like our fifth or sixth largest county in the state, there is one Starbucks within an earshot of St. Louis. That's in Arnold. That's in their largest city. And anybody who's ever been down to Arnold, and if you frequent Starbucks, which I sometimes more than I should do, I have my own coffee maker, but I still like it. The place is packed. It's really the only game in town. You just can't. You can find a seat in there, but they are always cranking out service. And I've been thinking about, is that place actually going to be open tomorrow? And I ultimately that's at the discretion of Starbucks. And I was thinking about, it really would be nice to kind of go down there and get something to drink. But I mean, even if the state reopens, things aren't really going to be the same. The restaurants and stores, they're going to be wanting people to get in and out. There's probably occupancy requirements, things of that nature. So it's not really going to be the same. I go back to that person's post about totalitarianism and oppression. Now, again, I wish that we could reopen. I also know that my going to a place that reopens, that I could be an asymptomatic carrier, and even if I had the opportunity to go into a place, would I really? So I studied public health in college, and I admit it, I never read the book, but I did see the movie. It was called And the Band Played On. It starred Matthew Modine, who's probably best known for his role in Full Metal Jacket. He was also in the last Christian Bale Batman movie. I think he played like a police chief. And he played somebody who was kind of a forensic investigator for the NIH. It was kind of an ensemble cast, and the film it focuses on how they were doing these kind of forensic investigations, and they were figuring out that it was gay men who were mostly contracting this new disease that we didn't really know much about. There was some pushback at the time. The NIH and the CDC, they maybe didn't get the funding that they would have wanted, but that's really always been the case. I don't want to focus on, whether or not, would Jimmy Carter have done more? It's the same way I feel about, if Hillary Clinton was president right now, we'd still be having this COVID-19. But what I do think about is how, if you look in the 1970s, the gay community across the country was starting to get recognized. I mean, people were going on things like the Phil Donahue Show and talking about the fact that they were, the phrase at that time, homosexuals. And people actually first were aware of the fact that they existed, or a lot of people didn't even, think of the concept of homosexuality was a real thing. It just wasn't something people talked about in polite company. So in the 1970s, there was a lot of organizing in the Bay Area, particularly San Francisco, so that people could have gay bars, the Castro district. Harvey Milk, who was elected to the San Francisco City Council, again, never read any books about him, but I did see the movie of Sean Penn. It was a good movie. I know everyone doesn't like Sean Penn, but about how they were able to beat a statewide amendment that would ban teachers from who were gay from being teachers in the state of California. And there was a lot of real social advancement in the 1970s for that group. And in the film, two of the investigators go into a gay bathhouse, and they start to think that it's sexually transmitted because it's primarily gay people who are getting it. That's the consensus. That's all they know. They don't know what it is. They don't understand that it's a retrovirus. They, at the time they were calling it GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency disorder. Well, eventually, heterosexual people started getting it. But the pushback in the gay community against closing the bathhouses, probably from people who would never even want to go into one of those, it was pretty substantial because a lot of people in that community, they just assumed that this was just a way for the government to crack down on their activity. It's a real shame that Harvey Milk was later assassinated in 1978. I think that he was kind of somebody who was a bridge between, the business community, public health officials, and the gay community in San Francisco. But eventually they got it done, long story short. But people who were gay in the 1980s were really the primary group of people who were affected by this virus. And the federal response was not what it is right now. We can always do better. And, again, you think about just the incremental gains that group of people got during that time span. And now the perception is that they're the ones who are transmitting this disease. And you had people saying that it was, maybe, retribution for what they did. And, again, the attitude really at a federal level was benign neglect. Nobody really wanted to touch this issue. So I go back to thinking about what this person was talking about with regard to oppression. The CDC has said that the state of Missouri, that every state in the country, every municipality, every county, that until you have seen a drop over the course of 14 days in new transmissions and deaths, which again, that can be difficult if you're not testing adequately, and some places they look worse because they're doing a good job of testing. But I really don't think we're ready to reopen, and I think it's a shame. I think it's going to lead to more people dying, which I ultimately think is more oppressive than me having the privilege to go inside a Starbucks, to go inside the Stone Spiral. And I wish that people could understand that the CDC and the NIH and, Doctors Birch and Fauci, again, I'm trying to explain to this in a way that so folks understand. I don't think it's political. I wish this wasn't happening. I don't care if a residual effect of this could be, the effect on the election. I wish this wasn't here. And if you told me that without this disease that Donald Trump will get reelected, I'd say, yeah, you're probably right. He was probably on track to getting reelected before this, and for him, it's unfortunate. And I just don't think about it in those terms. When estimating 100 to 240,000 people are dying, hypothetically, that's something that I don't want. I don't want a candidate to win an election because a bunch of people die, as hyper-partisan as we are. I don't think that we live in an authoritarian country. I think that there are people out there with authoritarian tendencies, but I don't think that, being able to go to the movie theater and seeing Star Wars Episode 9 and seeing Knives Out and seeing Uncut Gems, because the movie theater isn't going to show the new movies just because certain states or counties have reopened. And I don't think that being able to go inside a Starbucks constitutes oppression. There are some people out there who want us to reopen, and they may have legitimate reasons for doing so, but the public health data shows we're not ready. So that's my message for today. What one person defines as an oppression, another person could really look at from a certain perspective as a minor inconvenience. So let's, even though we're reopening partially as a state tomorrow, and a lot of parts of the country are doing this, let's still think about what can we do to mitigate the effects of this. There are some people who are going to be forced to go back to work, and it's not really safe, and they could pick this up, and they could have a pre-existing condition, and they could end up dying. You know, I know New York City isn't America, but we have had 30 members of the NYPD die, which is, it's terrible. It's terrible what's happened in New York City. So that's my reflection for today. Maybe I'll come back and do more of these another time. But thanks for listening to me. I wanted to get this in under 10 minutes, and it looks like I talked for 15. So thanks for listening, and hopefully the reopening of Missouri will not be as bad as I think it'll be. Bye-bye.